And we're back with another edition of the narrative walkthrough of Minecraft's PC Mac edition in survival mode. This is Nick, the ElusiveEnderman, and we once again return to the story of Steve in his little red house in the world of Minecraft. If you recall, in the first episode of our show, Steve set out to build himself a shelter so he could survive the first night. And he did. He succeeded in his goal. And despite the fact that early in the morning he had seen a creeper hanging out in the side of his house, he was able to fight it off. This episode is going to hold all kinds of new adventures for Steve. He's going to go and gather more wood to build his house. He's going to build up his house in a way that you may have never seen before. Chances are you probably have, but you may have never seen it before. Steve got up in the morning and went out to his backyard, pulling out his trusty wooden axe, which didn't have too much life in it left because it had been beaten against other pieces of wood for so many different attempts at building up the house. But the wood cut through the wood, and he was able to make himself a couple of planks of the nice red stuff. Using his axe, he then tried to see if he could knock down some of the leaves, because he had a sense that over time he had begun to really deforest the region. And deforestation is never a good thing. Nobody ever really wants things to be deforested. We all want them to be around. We want them to last a long time, because even if we are loggers, the reality is a forest that has trees is a forest that helps us, whether it gives us oxygen and we appreciate its beauty, or whether we're just logging away to try and build ourselves a red house. Steve felt that there weren't as many saplings as he had kind of anticipated. So he started to beat away at the trees, see if he could make himself some new saplings, but first he decided that he wanted to get some food. It was breakfast time, and beating up a cow, grabbing his leather and meat, would make sure that he had something to put into the furnace later on that day. He went on a rampage and got lots of different pieces of cow meat. And he wondered again whether the raw meat would sustain him in the same way that the cooked meat could, even though he knew deep down inside that it never would. Once he was back inside his little red house, he moved himself over to the furnace and placed the 5 pieces of meat in. Well, at least he might have if he hadn't felt that making himself an iron pickaxe is probably the best thing he could do today. Having an iron pickaxe would make sure that when he encountered a diamond, which he would, given enough time, he would be able to get at it. And since he had a couple of pieces of iron left, Steve decided, yeah, I think I'll make myself a sword. I know when I go down into the mines, I'm going to want to have something that will protect me. And if I use this wooden sword, I'm probably not going to do that great a job of protecting myself. Now that he had collected a little bit of extra red wood, he felt that it was time to finally change around that roof. The roof would be the thing that he looked upon as he fell asleep at night in his bed made up of 3 squares of wool and 3 squares of wood, as all beds are. So once again he pulled out his trusty wooden axe and cut away at the wood overhead. Thinking about how he would make this particular roof, he knew he definitely wanted to have the red wood in place, because the roof would actually serve as a second floor, and he wanted to have consistency in his household. Just as expected, though, he was waylaid by the fact that that wooden axe of his, the one that he had trusted to actually cut away at the other pieces of wood, just really wasn't cutting it. No pun intended. So he went out to make a couple more sticks, knowing that sticks, being the handle of axes, would enable him to create the stone axe, one step up from the one that he already had. Stephen, in making his axe, realized that the other day, when he had made the 4 wooden tools and questioned why he hadn't gotten the achievement for creating all the different tools, realized that he'd only created 4 of 5 wooden tools. And he made a note to himself that in the next episode, he would definitely be sure to create that wooden hoe. Because once he had the wooden hoe, that achievement would be done. And he wouldn't have to come upon it in surprise at a later time. Now that he was armed with the stone axe, Stephen chopped away dutifully at his roof. He realized that actually building it up would probably work best if he had another layer. And in order to get to the height that he needed to be able to complete that layer, he started to put up scaffolding and hopped his way over in the safety of the top of that scaffolding to start building the walls of his place. The walls needed to be at least 4 high all the way around. And that way, when he walked into his house, he would have 3 blocks of height to protect himself. Now, Steve, he wasn't the greatest builder ever. In fact, he was still figuring out the controls. But knowing that his trusty axe was always around, mistakes really didn't have too many consequences. Building was going pretty well, so he decided to stop and take a break to eat some steak. He'd have to eat a couple pieces because really he had gone far too long without having some food. Knowing that he was surrounded by cows and easy access to meat in the future, and also knowing that being able to cook the meat would make it more nutritious and fill up his health bar in ways that he couldn't anticipate getting with eating rotten flesh or meat that had been uncooked, he went back to building his house. Steve was a little bit clumsy with the building, and every once in a while would put blocks in places that they shouldn't be put. Even though he knew that doing that would just waste more time, he was still figuring out the controls, and at some point he was sure he would be able to figure out how to do this properly. In fact, at some point he would probably get up on the wall and complete the wall from there. But he probably wouldn't figure that out until he was building the 2nd floor. See, Steve wasn't that great of a planner. Even though he had gone out and made stacks and stacks of wood, he didn't actually go through and count how many pieces of wood he would need in order to complete his roof. And lacking that insight, he found that soon enough he would run out and have to go back into the world, cut more wood, build up a small copse of trees to sustain his farm once he found his first saplings, and work away at building this house. He kind of liked how it was laid out right now, with the entranceway having a small torch bracket, and knowing that in that space he could put his coat when he walked in cold from the night and wanted to be warm. Steve, once he realized that nighttime was falling and he had an opportunity to build himself a bed, went out to go and hunt for some sheep, marveling at the abundance of horses and commenting to himself that one of those days in the future he would be able to tame that horse and ride it off into his own sunset. He collected his 3 sheep, got their wool, and then found his way home through the pit that the creeper had made the day before, so that he could build his bed and skip the night to return to building in the morning. The sun set in a vast orange blaze on the horizon, and the last remains of the day trailed off and became night. And Steve, tidying up his home, remarking at the beauty of the starlit sky at night before he went to build his bed from 3 blocks of wood and 3 blocks of wool, somehow manifesting as a bed with posts and blankets. finished his house for the day, sought a place to lay his head at night, to put his bed where it wouldn't be in the way and wouldn't be too near a creepy hole, laid down in bed, closed his eyes, and drifted into sleep. The morning came so suddenly that it was almost as if the dreams that he had been having at night continued into the daytime. But realizing that this was no dream, that this was real life, he quickly jumped up onto the roof, noted the surrounding creepers, the dangers that live at the grim edges of his life, always circling, always searching for an opportunity, but just out of reach. And looking up, felt that the world could not be more beautiful and more dangerous all at once. He had a big day ahead of him. Steve knew that today he would have to finish off his roof, and he knew that at some point he wanted to do something a little bit unique with the house. Just building a straight block, three-dimensional and square and facade, probably wouldn't cut it. If he could, he would shift himself so that he would walk up to the edge and not worry about falling off again and again and again, and be able to put blocks on the outside to create a small rim all the way around the edge. And upon that rim he would put up the next wall. And for the floor above that he would go out another step, and then another and another. And as he did this over and over again, every episode, he would eventually have a giant, red, upside-down wooden pyramid. Not too different from what the Aztecs had. Steve had spent a lot of time as a child reading up about the Aztecs and the Mayas, and many years ago when he was in college, he had had the opportunity to actually visit that area of the world. He went to San Cristobal en las Casas, and outside that area, which was not too far from Oaxaca, and the Palenque and all the regions inside where he could visit shaman and curanderos and other traditional faith healers to try and find the solutions to the things that ailed him. When he was out there, he saw nature as it was meant to be and saw civilization in an era where, not armed with much more than what Steve started here with, they built massive, massive cities. And these cities contained pyramids, and those pyramids were built as if they wished to be stairs, but couldn't help but be pyramids. And what Steve thought would be, they would be so clever to turn that upside down, turn that stepwise pyramid and build it up, from the ground up, from the top down, wait, switch that and reverse it. But in order to do that, he would need to find himself some saplings, because going far and far away every single day to try and get wood, and get the same kind of wood, the asaya, he wasn't really sure how to pronounce it. Whatever that tree was, getting that tree was going to be really important, and building up a nice little forest near his house was going to keep him well supplied with plenty of it to go on from here on out. So Steve knew that chopping up the branches would get him the saplings that he needed. So going on a run to collect the wood was also going on a run to collect the saplings. And he wouldn't let one tree go down without getting the sapling as well. As Steve chopped away and the sun streamed down on his head, sweat started to pool in the small of his back, and his shirt that he had been given when he actually spawned in the game started to get wet. He sought another tree and enjoyed the not yet despawned leaves, chopped away piece by piece, and thought to himself, man, those cows off in the distance, they make some really contented sighs. The cows in this world sure are satisfied cows. They seem to be really happy with the way things are going. Steve jumped about, and that day he had probably cut 10-15 trees. Probably actually not that many, but he had cut a whole bunch of trees, more than he had ever thought he could cut. And much to his surprise, the wooden axe seemed to be lasting. Even though he'd upgraded to stone, he kept forgetting that the wooden axe which he had cherished so much at the beginning of the game had broken long ago. And the stone axe actually wasn't holding up as well as he had thought it might be. In fact, the more leaves that he broke away with it, the more wood he wouldn't. But he had gotta get those saplings. He had to get those saplings. He had to cut and cut away until those saplings came. So Steve kept chopping with his stone axe, chopping away at the trees, finding wood in order to build his house. And when his house was built, when that second floor was up, he started to think about the different things he wanted to do. And he wondered if there was somebody out there who could leave a comment and suggest to him the other things that he might build. Man, life would be so easy if only I had those kind of suggestions. But Steve had to figure them out on his own. He had to come up with interesting solutions in order to be able to build to its fullest potential. And some of the ideas that he had, well, they had to do with animal husbandry. Animal husbandry is the amazing practice of getting animals to a pen by leading them on with hay that they may or may not actually get to eat, closing that pen, and then forcefully feeding those animals until they spawned a little large-headed version of themselves. Those little large-headed versions of the dogs and cats and ocelots and cows and pigs and horses of this game kind of weird me out. I mean, really. Anyways, that's what Steve was thinking in his mind, but how could he know that he hadn't actually accomplished any of that yet? He was just digging away at the grass, clearing out space because he wanted to figure out if the acacia tree, this weird tree that he had never actually encountered before, if that needed some kind of ground clearance to be able to grow properly. He wasn't really going to be bothered to look it up anywhere. I'm sure he could go on the internet and find out the solution, but Steve wanted to do this by trial and error because Steve was kind of an adventurer. He was a person who liked to discover things and not have them fed to him straight away. So having his ground cleared the way that he thought it should be, or he thought it might be, and looking at the dark green grass versus the bright green grass as a planting ground for the acacia tree, whatever it's called, he started to put down the saplings so that he would be able to have a nice little copse of trees near his home within walking distance. At some point, he would need to figure out what to do, though, because his inventory was getting full, and it was filling up with things like wheat seeds and grass seeds and grass clippings and other worthless things that he probably didn't need to be collecting down in his pockets or wherever he kept all of that stuff. And he started to wonder, I have got 64 blocks of stone on my body. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted. Steve came to his home and discovered that one of the undead had invaded. And there was no explanation for how this undead had entered his home. Armed with his iron sword, he smote the zombie, but then started to investigate why, how is it possible that that zombie was able to infiltrate his safe haven? Going on theory alone, he concluded that it must have been the light. The lack of light in his house, the lack of music in his world, the lack of clarity and brightness and safety and protection were the reasons why he wasn't able to keep his home zombie free. So he dedicated himself to brightening up the place, putting torches in places where there were no torches before, and ensuring that his home would be lit all the way to its fullest for as long as he needed. Coming up to the top, he realized, man, it sure turns to night really quickly here. This place is beautiful, and his days only last 10 minutes. Our orbit around this sun must be insignificant. I mean, Mercury surrounds the sun. It's gotta be like 15 days or something, and that place is burning hot. But look at me. I live on this land with biodiversity, multiple blocky animals, and biomes as far as the eye can see, with mycelium and wooded forests, and thick snows and hot deserts. I live in an amazingly varied place, where creepers roam free, the bastardization of pigs, infused with gunpowder, that operate on the periphery of my vision. I build on this biodiverse region that is dangerously close to the sun, and I must only conclude, I must know that my space is small, and that my sun must be cold and distant, only relative to something that's actually really, really close. Steve, wandering through his mind and actually saying a bunch of nonsense because it was really late at night, decided to go to bed, because when he got up in the morning, he knew that he would be much better rested and much more cogent, and all of the words that tumbled out of his mouth would make a lot more sense, especially because it was getting kind of weird that Steve was conscious of the fact that he was being narrated at all times, that his life had not only narration, but theme music, and that his building, his crafting, his attempts to survive were all being captured on a computer in a distant galaxy, in a distant dimension that existed outside his plane of reason. Ignoring the fact that he was probably completely crazy and high out of his mind, Steve got back on the roof, and despite his drug-addled mind, continued to work towards the building of a high wall that would allow him to have nice three-block clearance for his head when he came upstairs to do whatever he was planning to do upstairs. Whatever he was planning to do upstairs is probably some sick stuff, but you never really know with Steve. I mean, he's just an interesting guy. Steve is a bad rapping name. He had to think a little bit harder about what his rapping name could maybe be. But Steve wasn't that drug-addled. He wasn't that crazy and out of his mind. He actually had some good ideas every now and then, and that idea right now was to actually hop up on top of the wall and be building from the vantage of the block right in front of him. That way he would know how many spaces he needed to go in order to fill up the wall, and he could make sure that with the shift key down, he wasn't going to be walking right off his now much taller building into the waiting arms of a creeper or a zombie or a skeleton far below. Steve was getting pretty close to actually finishing that wall, and with this last block that he placed in, Steve was pretty proud of these walls that he had made. Finding a safe place to gently leap back into the home, he started the process of building the roof. A roof over your head is one of the nicest and best things that you could possibly ever hope for. And since his plan was to actually have a full roof with another layer on top and the eaves one distance further, decorated potentially with vines taken from the jungle biome, he knew he'd have to go out and get more wood. And he was lucky, because it was still daylight outside, and lo and behold, his acacia, the redwood trees, seemed to be growing. At least some of them were. And as the narrator stubbed his toe painfully on the edge of his chair, making noises that may or may not have been picked up by the microphone, Steve continued to clear the space, trying to figure out what exactly do I need to do in order to get these trees to grow automatically. I know I stayed up overnight a little bit late and the trees may not have gotten the tender nurturing that they need, but it also might be due to the fact that there wasn't enough dirt around there, so I'm going to place some dirt. And once I've done that, I'm going to get me some breakfast. Steve went around, slaughtered a few animals, and thought about the fact that once his house was built up, he would be able to create a nice, shaded, complete area down below where he could take care of his animals, treat them right, feed them every day, and keep them safe. Put some dogs around them so that they would be watched after, and feed those dogs whatever dogs eat until they turn into loving sexual creatures with little red hearts floating over their heads, and make me more little dogs. Steve ate a small lunch sitting underneath the acacia tree, and once he had completed his lunch and cut a few more blocks, his axe abruptly broke. And finding that he had a crafting table securely tucked away inside his inventory, he pulled it out, placed it down, and built himself a replacement axe. And then used that axe to destroy the block in a way that was consistent with its making. Blocks into blocks, into blocks, into blocks. An interesting and endless cycle of matter in the world of Minecraft. Steve paused for a moment because he realized that his inventory was completely out of order. For some reason, he had wheat seeds in the number 1 slot, and he knew that wheat seeds weren't really going to be necessary in that space. So he put his weapon in case some strange mob or angry grumbling zombie showed up in a distant place, or in a nearby place, or in a very unexpected place. That zombie could be dealt with very quickly. And you'll have to excuse that pause there. I'm going to break the fourth wall for a minute and admit the fact that it is pretty late. And I yawned. And I've got to wonder how many of your subconscious brains recognize the fact that my yawning was actually a yawn, and therefore triggered you to yawn. Not because this is boring. What Steve is doing is vitally important. If he doesn't shape the world around him, he will die, and you will witness the end of a man's opportunity to survive. Steve realized all this. He knew what was at stake, and he knew that in order to protect himself, he had to create a sustainable area. He had to create himself a little farm of trees where he could mine the wood and build his home. So Steve revisited his little copse of trees, which was amazingly productive. He found that trees were there that weren't there before, and he danced through their boughs, laughing the whole time about how amazing it was to have nature right in front of his door. And wanting to expand that nature, wanting to build it and make it more, wanting to multiply, he planted himself more of the acacia trees. Acacia trees, acacia. So that his copse would be plentiful. Having found the perfect spot for each of those, he returned to his home to discover that he had wood, and wood made planks, and planks in his hand meant a roof over his head. Quickly darting up to the roof, he started to place blocks in the order in which he would be allowed to by the game. Steve, conscious of the fact that his world was somewhat artificial, dealt with the limitations that his own environment imposed on him with great great candor and took it in perfect stride. Steve built away at the forest, putting this there, and this here, and this there, and this here, and realized very quickly that time was running out. He would need to go to sleep soon, and once his place was secure and nice and bright and prevented from the spawning of mobs in the dark corners and dark places to give him unexpected surprises when he returned home, he would have to close down the episode, since it was soon enough that his time would be done and he would have to return back to his life, boring it may be, undiverting it may be, and finish the episode. But first he would tidy up his room, remark on the effectiveness of the staircase, be very pleased with the completeness and the potential, and work his way downstairs to plan his next steps. Looking outside, noting the position of the sun, he decided that he had enough time to venture down and grab a couple more pieces of coal. He knew that the coal in his furnace would run out quickly enough. The more meat he cooked, the more coal it demanded. Gathering that XP, building it up so that he'd be able to get himself to the next level, he worked away at the coal with his stone pickaxe. He wanted to finish up that stone pickaxe before it fell to pieces, and winding around the parts that he had already eaten away at, he got more coal than he probably knew what to do with. The coal in his pockets, the sheep bleeding on his side, Steve felt very content, very at home, very at peace with the world and its beauty and the brightness of the setting suns. Bounding back up the hole to make it to his beautiful home with his outstretched eaves and inverse base, with its lighting and its door and its consistency in color, Steve came back inside and began to think of how he might close the day. Checking the time, he realized that, well, I've been here for more than half an hour, and we've made up for lost time. This was a fun episode. This was enjoyable to me. Tonight, I will go to sleep and I will dream of the next day and how it may bring to me a chance to make glass and offer vision of the beautiful sunrise and sunset to myself through the bed. How I might complete the hole at the base of my floor, and how I might enjoy myself in the next episode of this Minecraft survival series. Thanks. This has been Nick, the Elusive Enderman.